Hello, everybody. Welcome to week 3 of BC1-1808, getting started in Blender, specifically 2.8. But you guys should probably know this. I think we have a couple new faces, so felt like introducing, what exactly the context of this particular stream is. But also, thank you, Katarina, or Kate. I'm sorry, I'm trying to shorten that. I'm used to seeing your display name. But Kate, you created that reel again for everybody. I love that touch. It's so cool to see everybody's work organized together in a slideshow like that. So thank you for that. It really showcased the quality of work that we've seen this past week. And you guys continue to do an amazing job at the homework. So thank you for that. Thanks for the submissions. It's been a lot of fun. I think also Miranda calculated like over 1,400 comments so far, or like total replies in the amongst the homework threads, and that's the most ever, kind of by a few hundred. So anyway, just that iterates the level of communication that's going on. All kinds of questions being asked and answered. Just more of the class magic, the stuff that I love to see. And let me see if I can see myself. Make sure I can get close. All right, I don't have like a suit or a grinder handy, so I'll just try and do like the face, I guess. Let's see. So I'm like holding the thing, and it's like something like that. Maybe. Get some of that pose hype, that weird tradition that's grown out of this thing. But anyway, I hope that was good enough. It's lagging a lot. Not again. Let me know if that's better. Okay, no lag. All right, I'm gonna say smart stuff before it begins lagging again. All right, just keep me informed. If it does start lagging, I will test my speed. Again, I should have great internet. It shouldn't be happening. But all right, I'll try and get to the smart stuff as soon as possible. So this week, the third week in this beginner course, introductory course to Blender and what we can do with computer graphics, we're talking about digital clay, right? So the idea of digital sculpting. So it does have to do with modeling. The whole class has to do with modeling, as most of you probably know. My router maybe is just going bad. I have had it for a while, so I didn't really know that happened, but it makes sense. Technology degrades, so I will look into that. Okay, yeah, digital clay, the idea of sculpting in your computer. So last week we looked into mesh modeling, right? And that was mesh modeling for me. When I got into building stuff in the computer, I found mesh modeling to be extremely unintuitive. I just remember thinking like this has to be the hardest way possible to build things that I was interested in, like characters or creatures, more organic things. It was fine for weapons and stuff like that, hard surface things, but it never really clicked for organic things. And that's where digital clay comes in. That's where digital sculpting just opened up a brand new horizon. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. But before we get into that, as usual, we're going to look back at week 2 and some of my favorite submissions, the ones that stuck out to me the most. Again, you saw the reel, so you know that the quality of work was very high for everybody. But there were a handful that I remember the most, kind of thing. That stuck out to me. And the first one is Pavel Mazanik's EV skull is I guess what I called it. And I remember seeing you post a work in progress image of this, and I was like, wow, you're going for a skull. That is a lofty goal, and I respect it, and you did it very well. So that's what stuck out to me about this one, is the fact that we did mesh modeling last week, which was it was this week. It's very easy to like keep things hard surface. So going into the organic space is less common, and I respected you for that, and you did a really good job, and it turned out great. Very interesting, kind of like punk, sci-fi, dark sort of. Something from Doom, I feel like, is what it reminded me of. So anyway, it was really high quality work. Good job. Thank you for submitting that. Curious, your ocean floor scene. I enjoyed watching you build that up, like seemingly day after day, all last week. So you started with like a simplified scene with like the turtle and the tentacle, a couple other things, and then you just kept building onto it and building onto it. And by the end, someone mentioned that it was busy looking, and while that might be true, what I think is most important is that you kept mesh modeling, you kept exploring different shapes, exploring different modifiers. We've got a range of different mesh models in here. And so clearly you really got into mesh modeling this week and really did work in there basically. And so that was the entire point of the week. So I liked what came out of that from you. So good job there. And then we've got Julian B's Claptrap model, which I've never heard of this character. Apparently it's from a game called Borderlands. And just a very interesting robot character. And I thought you did an excellent job. You posted some art. Go check out his thread if you haven't seen it yet. But very cool, very authentic representation of that character. A lot of intricate details to garnish the model, to really sell it. And you did an awesome job. Awesome job. Loved seeing that model come about. And yeah, it's a great job. Kate, your ornamental clock. I mean, I kind of joke about it with myself, but I feel like I don't want to always feature you, but you just keep bringing good models and good artwork. So your ornamental clock, I couldn't deny amidst my favorites, and a lot of cool details. Obviously, I mean, it speaks for itself. You have a really good job about not like showcasing your model in like a simplified light, but a very effective light. And that, I don't know, that takes, I noticed that about it, and I really respect it. So great job. You did an excellent work here, and yeah, good job. So we've got the Victorian spiral staircase from N647. I loved this submission. I hope you're okay with it, but I'm going to dive into Blender since you shared your blend file, and I want to look into it. I want to kind of dissect it a little bit for a few minutes, just so people can see like what is possible with modifier-based modeling. And this, I don't know if there's a better example of this spiral staircase. It's awesome. It looks great, but it's so cleverly built, and that's why I want to look into it a little bit more, and so people can maybe get insight into that. But and finally, Jake, your Commodore 64. I mean, what's there to say? It's awesome. The level of detail you achieved, it's super impressive. It's an Eevee render, and it looks almost like a photo. There's a couple areas that look, not 100% realistic, but most of it looks amazing. And I don't know how much time you spent in Eevee if you just easily picked it up, but Eevee's not very old, and so you're doing great work with it. I'm very impressed. But yeah, love the modeling. I love the authenticity of. I never had a Commodore 64, but I recognize that it's pretty iconic, and you did a great job. Just a great job with it. Okay, so with that said, those are my favorites, I believe. Yeah, before we get into the sculpting stuff, I did want to jump into Blender and talk about this spiral staircase, because I feel like there's some good insight to glean from it. And thank you for sharing, first of all. I appreciate you doing that. So yeah, we'll get into it. Now, it looks very complex. You did a version earlier that was a more simplified staircase, and that I thought was awesome. I'm like, I loved the way you constructed it. And then you took it to the next level by making it this Victorian style, which is very recognizable with all this intricate, like, scroll work. I don't know if that's what it's technically called, but iron work and stuff like that. But this complex result is actually built pretty simply, and you leaned heavily on modifiers. So I wanted to go through the scene as best I can. Just spend a couple minutes talking about this. Maybe hide. Whoops. I need to turn on my overlay so I know what is selected. How many vertices does the staircase have? Let's check that out. Maybe I'll just hide what is not part of the staircase. Let's see. The staircase itself. Where are the statistics? It's telling us objects 3. It's not telling us the. Does it not tell us the total amount of faces anymore? Seems kind of odd. Oh, vert count seems to be broken in 2.8. That makes sense. Maybe we won't be able to see that. But if we tab into edit mode on this first object, all right, keep in mind that it's duplicated and spun all the way around the spiral. But when you tab into edit mode, it's a very simple shape that's simple polygons kind of connected in this design. And if we look down into the modifier stack, let's see. Okay, so a couple modifiers are starting to work in 2.8. You can see that I can click on the shrink wrap and it snaps into position, but not all of them do. The solidify does not. So I don't know, progress is starting to be made with the modifier functionality inside Blender 2.8. But so the shrink wrap, what he's doing here is he's using a cylinder to snap that flat shape into the round curvature, which is smart. Like modeling this flat is much easier than trying to model it by hand to wrap around a curve. So that, what is that object? Cylinder guide auxiliary. Where is that? It's somewhere in here. Cylinder guide auxiliary. There it is. All right, so he's snapping to this object just to get that. There you go. Snapping right there to get that curvature that matches the rest of the spiral staircase. So that's modifier number 1. Modifier number 2 is, let's see, the solidify modifier, right? So he's taking the flat shapes, just extruding them out procedurally, and that gives it the thickness that he's after. The bevel modifier. So I actually don't ever use the bevel modifier, but this makes me realize how much I'm missing out on. So if we turn on the wireframe, man, it's really slow. Hope that doesn't go bad for my demonstration. So if we turn on, let's see, the bevel modifier, right? So that simply hardens the edges. Again, procedurally, not having to do that manually is pretty nice, and this model works perfectly for it. Finally, subsurf is giving him the smoothness, the higher resolution. And then array, so that's how he's getting it to spin around the spiral. And again, I think that's a clever way to go about it. If we open the array modifier, which we should be familiar with from last week's demonstration about the phone cord, you can do offset right here, which is like plugging in manual values. He does not choose that. Instead, he goes with an object offset, which I think is very intuitive because he's using this stair rotator. Let me find where that's at. Where is it? Steps. Where was it? I've seen, Resson guides, that's where it was. Stair rotator main. Yeah, that's the one. Why can't I see it? Okay, there we go. It's this guy right here. So he's using this empty so that when he rotates it, he can dynamically kind of choose. Oh my gosh, 2.8 is chugging with the live stream going. And I'm not even recording this. But you can hopefully see it's very, very laggy right now. But as I rotate around, the stairs rotate along with the empty. And also the position does the same thing. Man, this is... I did not expect it to be this laggy. And then as I move it up, you can see that everything separates. Anyway, that is only one object. There's only 3 pieces making up this staircase. We've got the scroll work we talked about. We've got the frame. And anyway, that's been a few minutes. But if you have time, check out his scene. It's built very, very well and cleverly. So it's pretty amazing the amount of geometry, the amount of detail he gets. Not quite for free, but for a lot less work. So yeah, awesome scene. I loved that one. I loved that example of it being so modifier heavy. So great job with that. Did I miss any questions? Let me see here. Question, what is he using the shrink wrap for again? So I'll go back to that real quick. If he didn't use the shrink wrap modifier, it's kind of an extra touch. Like he didn't need to do this. He or she did not need to do this, but currently the shape of the stairs is rounded and his default shape is flat, which makes sense. It's easier to build the shape flat and then curve it with a modifier rather than build it curved in the first place. So that's what he's using the shrink wrap to move this shape into a rounded profile. That's the point. Anything else that I missed? Oh, good. You're right here. Yeah, awesome. You're right here, probably correcting me if I was wrong about anything, but explaining stuff too. That's perfect. question. How many vertices does a stair have? I'm not sure. Let's see. We can look at the mesh mode. Looks like 1,000 verts. Is that right? Seems like it would be less than 1,000. Like far less than 1,000. I don't know. I don't know if that's right. I wouldn't trust it. Someone said that was broken. Yeah, very nice and efficient. Amen to that. All right, so that's week 2. Awesome job, guys. Only about 25, 28%, somewhere in there, did we have fall off from like participation from the first week. And that's okay. I know stuff comes up, but I got my eyes on you because I don't know. I'd love for everybody to finish the month strong, spend the whole month with us. And we always typically fall off each week, but like only fell off about 28%. But if you're still planning to participate, please do. Cool. All right. So on to week 3, the digital clay situation. Set your inner artisan free. That's my subtitle. And the reason for that subtitle, again, goes back to the fact that I find mesh modeling extremely unintuitive as an artist. It's not very artisan friendly. You know, like we kind of grew up with clay. A lot of kids are given Play-Doh, and so you're naturally like forming balls and rolling tubes, you know, smashing them together. You're doing that stuff a lot. I feel like aside from, there's not really any comparison to like pushing and pulling verts that I can think of. You know, that's a technical, mathematical, clunky way to do this kind of thing. So if you're more of an artisan, if you like to draw, or if you can relate to clay in any way, then this is going to be a much more fun way to shape things in the computer. And what is digital sculpting? The art of manipulating verts, edges, and faces into a purposeful 3D shape. That's actually the same definition from last week for mesh modeling, because it is the same, except with sculpting, it's more artistic tools known as brushes. That is the key factor in this. That's the key difference. Under the surface, it's doing all the same stuff. It's moving verts around. It's manipulating vertices, edges, and faces, but the way that you're doing that is totally different. Question, I submitted on Monday. Can I still get it marked? Yeah, I thought that I did that for you. Hold on a second. That's not it. Yeah, sorry. I was just thinking. I'm pretty sure that I got your grade. Yeah, so I did look at your grade today. I gave you one A+, so good job. But yeah, you've definitely, anyway, I've seen your work. Yeah, so it's doing the same thing. Mesh modeling, here's a picture of pulling up a single vertex of a mesh. You know, that's more mesh modeling. There's proportional editing, but generally it's like very rigid kind of movement. But then with sculpting, imagine that same thing, but you have a fall off all of a sudden. And yeah, sure, that is technically proportional editing, but that's the idea behind sculpting. So everything has a fall off. It's not just rigid. And that is due to the power of brushes. And we're going to go through probably all of these, if not most of them, certainly the important ones that I use, that I imagine a lot of people use whenever they're sculpting. So very much the power of brushes. That's the key part of sculpting, is how we interact with the shapes. Yeah, and this is a short presentation. That's it. Talk about the agenda for the week. So I want you to watch, if you haven't seen it yet, the Fundamentals of Sculpting course. Highly recommend that one for this week. It's going to, if you're a beginner, it's going to introduce you to the parts of Blender, the sculpting parts of Blender, and key concepts to keep in mind. It's going to go over the brushes. Now, this course is with 2.79. It's not with 2.8. And as of the last few weeks, I'm actually happy about that, because the last couple weeks, because Blender 2.8 has been pushed back. It's in a pretty buggy state right now. The more I use it, the more I realize it's wonky. And so I also want to say at this point, like, I've seen a lot of you guys using 2.8 the past couple weeks as well, and some of you have committed to not using it because it's too buggy. And at this point, I tend to see where you're coming from. It's been buggy enough for me that that if you want to use 2.79 for the rest of the class, that makes sense. I say go for it. That's okay. 2.8 has more bugs than I expected when I started the class, but I'm still going to try and use it today. But I might revert to 2.79 if it gives me too much trouble. But anyway, so that Fundamentals of Sculpting course is 2.79, which is a much more stable version currently. Question: do you think sculpting will run faster in 2.8 performance-wise? I mean, I would tend to expect that it would. If it runs slower, that's just bizarre, because it's newer technology, newer software, newer pass at all of that software, everything's being touched kind of a thing. So I would expect it to be a little bit faster, but at least the same. But to my knowledge, there aren't like any Google. I shouldn't say that. I haven't looked exactly, but I don't know of much sculpting development that's going on right now. I mean, it's a pretty powerful package by itself. I don't know of anybody doing a lot of sculpting dev. Any other questions I'm missing? Do you think? Okay. Question: did you suddenly change the extra credit as? Oh, I did. I did. I'm sorry. I didn't go over that. So the homework. If you go through the Fundamentals of Sculpting course, you're going to be doing the Melvin sculpting exercise. So I would like to see you do that as part of the homework. If you've already done it, just post a link to your submission, and I'll give you credit for it. And then you're going to sculpt 3 primitive shapes, which I'm going to demonstrate in Blender today during the stream. And finally, I did change the last part of it where it was like, I was kind of ambiguous, like choose 3 objects and sculpt whatever you want. But this time I wanted to give you a little more direction, and I changed it today to be sculpt a human face for extra credit. And if I have time, if I don't keep you too long, I would like to at least try doing that in the stream as well. But yeah, the idea is just to like, that was the first thing I ever sculpted. I really wanted to get into humans, and it was a good exercise in something hard to model. And also you have the perfect reference. Since you have your own face, I recommend using your face as reference. Not with the expectation that it will look like you in the end, but just so that you can see your face from every angle. You can see what the nostril looks like from below, from the top, your face from a 3/4 angle. Like, you have the best possible reference right there. And so I think that'll be a good guide if you've never sculpted a human face before. But it is very difficult, so I did make it like extra credit. You'll get your pluses for doing the sculpt a human face exercise. But this is a PG-13 stream. Did I say something funny? Or something PG-13? I didn't think I did. But yeah, that's what we're doing this week. That's the homework. Sorry for pulling a fast one on you, but I hope that doesn't mess anybody up like they've been doing the 3 random objects. If it does, then just submit the 3 random objects, and that'll be fine too. The point is just to get you sculpting. I want you to do sculpting. Aren't human faces hard? Yes, it is. They are very hard. But I don't mean to sculpt like I just mean to get like the general anatomy down. Like, get a nose shape, practice the ocular region, like a mouth. Really, the point is not to create a great human head sculpt at the end of this week, but just to be a challenge, right? And I mean, and in a way, like, if you can sculpt a human face, there's not too much you can't sculpt after that. So that's kind of the point, just to get you sculpting, to be a challenge. I don't know if there's too much feedback or if it's too hard. Like, I guess let me know. Let me know in the early parts of this week if it's if the human head thing is not a good idea, and we can audible. But I think you can do it. I think you can. Week 3 goals. Understand and practice digital sculpting. That is the key point. That's why we're here this week. And if you don't like it at the end, that's okay. Maybe there's a lot of cases where people prefer mesh modeling or hard surface stuff, and they don't find digital sculpting that helpful, and vice versa. Once you discover digital sculpting, you never go back to mesh modeling. There are cases like that. So I just want to open the door and invite people to find out if they enjoy digital sculpting. It is a very powerful part of Blender and computer graphics creation. All right, so consider purchasing a graphics tablet. If you really get into digital sculpting, a graphics tablet is going to be crucial. It's going to be very, very helpful. It's not a requirement, but it's very, very helpful. So we get a lot of questions about graphics tablets, so I wanted to go over that real quick. I see I've got a question. Seeing as we have more direct homework to complete now, would creating our thing earn extra credit too, or should we focus on the bust? Would creating our thing, if you mean like thing being our original plans. Oh, so what? If you had original plans, let me step back. If you had original plans and have already been thinking about week 3, I changed the plans assuming people weren't necessarily doing that. Then go with your original plans. Remember, ultimately, whatever gets you sculpting, go with that. Okay? I'm not gonna, if you sculpt, you know, a dragon or something, I'm not gonna be like, but you were supposed to do a human head. You know, I'm not gonna do that. Whatever gets you sculpting, go for that. Yeah, I haven't ever thought about sculpting my own face. Sounds like an interesting task. It was one of our big assignments in like the first sculpting class that I was ever in. And it was just a good challenge. Like it was an exercise. I didn't end up with a perfect result at the end of it, but it taught me a lot about how to sculpt, like the challenges within sculpting, how to interpret reference, how to see a shape in real life, and then transfer that into the computer. Because like if you get a bunch of photographic reference, that's a whole nother level of interpretation, a disconnected level of interpretation. Whereas when you're looking at your face, it's like the best reference, you know, some of the best reference, other than having an object in your hand. Yeah, okay, so about graphics tablets. Here's a couple examples. Wacom Intuos. Before I get into the specific examples, let me say, if you're into graphics tablets, the reason that they are important for sculpting, as Kenneth mentioned, is pressure sensitivity, right? So with my mouse right here, you click the button and it's like 0, 1, right? You get the button is not clicked, the button is clicked. But when if you imagine like clay and you've got this tool and you're manipulating the clay, you can push lightly or you can push hard, and both effects are vastly different from each other. And there's a whole spectrum in between. And that kind of like tactile flexibility is where the graphics tablet comes in, because you can push harder on the graphics tablet, you can push softer. It can affect how you sculpt significantly. So that's the big draw. And also I think that like it's a more natural like hand position, like ergonomics, I guess, to do something like sculpting, you know, because we all like wrote with pens and pencils and stuff growing up. So this is a natural motion for us, and doing it with a mouse is a little bit weird. So you know, when you sculpt and you use the wooden tools, like you kind of hold them this way often. So that it's just more intuitive. That's kind of the idea behind graphics tablets. Awesome. Yeah, if you guys have recommendations for graphics tablets, post them in the chat. I think people who are interested will find that helpful. We also have an article that I'm going to link you to about graphics tablets. But those are the two things you want to keep in mind if you're interested and why they're important for sculpting. Now, when you go into buying a tablet, the big qualifiers are the size of the tablet, and I guess the brand, right? There's as far as the brand, Wacom is without a doubt like the leading manufacturer of tablets. Huion, I find them as kind of like a very up and coming competitor that are often comparable, like in quality, but usually less expensive. So those two name brands are the ones that I kind of recommend. I've always had a Wacom. I bought a $100 Wacom in 2008, and it was a 4x6, so it was tiny. And so it was a cheaper model, and that lasted me like 7 or 8 straight years. I had worn the surface was like a matte finish, and it had become perfectly shiny because I had used it so much, but it never failed me. It always worked reliably. So you don't need an expensive tablet. Like I think there's ones selling for like $70, $80 right now from Wacom that are really good. So if you want to just try it and not commit to like a couple $100 one, that's totally an option. But yeah, it just depends on what size you want. Right now, I upgraded my size, and I have this. What is this, like 8x10 or 8x11? Some size. Oh, you can't even see it. Hold on. I've got this guy from Wacom. Yeah, I bought it refurbished on Amazon, and it's been great. Not a single problem with it. But it's a slightly bigger size. You know, depends on what you want. Like some people have massive ones and they like to make humongous strokes with their arm. I don't like doing that. I need it a little more compact. But yeah, so these two models right here, they've been up long enough you can probably see, you know, if you want to look them up yourself. A couple questions. Question, do you think the masters that sculpt in marble in the Roman times would be incredible sculptors in computers today? I can only imagine that they would be if they were open to the idea of sculpting in the computer. Surely they would be, because like what's important is like understanding how to form shapes, and the medium or the tools to get there end up becoming less important, right? They're just means to an end, and they're the same end, forming shapes. So I can only imagine that they would be phenomenal sculptors. Maybe not as soon as you showed them Blender or ZBrush, but like you give them a week inside, I'll bet they would be pretty amazing. They would just be fighting the software because they know exactly what they want to achieve, but not how to use the software. Oftentimes you get people who know how to use the software, but don't know how to achieve the shapes. Trying to see if I'm missing any other questions. Thanks for posting your tablets. Anyone who's interested, like, please pay attention to those suggestions. Look them up if you're interested. If you end up sculpting with a mouse this week, that's fine. But you might find at the end of the week that like, wow, this would be better with a pen style format. Okay, Jake, yeah, the first time I did Melvin's sculpting exercise with a mouse, I think it did an okay job. So sculpting is not impossible. That is true. If you don't have a tablet, but a tablet makes it much more intuitive. That's absolutely true. And I've heard like legends of like really great sculptors that never used a pen. I've heard the legend. I've never met them myself, but apparently those people exist. Question, for the primitive sculpt, do we have to start from a primitive to create another one? Yeah. Yes, so that is the idea. I'm going to show you that in the stream. That's going to be the demonstration I'm kind of going to go into right now. And yeah, that's the idea. It's kind of a backwards exercise where you take one primitive like a cone and turn it into a sphere, or a cube and turn it into a sphere, or a sphere and turn it into a cone using sculpt tools. That's the idea. It kind of gets your brain outside of its box kind of stuff. So with that in mind, let's try sculpting in Blender 2.8. Reload my startup file. Let's see. Question, could you go over how you can make a surface perfectly flat? I think you use the flatten brush for that, but I can't seem to get it perfectly flat. Yes. I think I know what you're talking about. If you're going, yeah, so I can show you how to get something perfectly flat, but perfection is going to be, like perfect flat or straight stuff is going to be hard to do with sculpting. That's maybe something to say out of the gate. The fact that sculpting, you know, like imagine with clay, it's going to be hard to get a clay surface completely flat. You can get it close, but like it's a similar idea in sculpting in computer graphics too. Like it's naturally going to be more organic and more soft, I guess. It's not going to be perfect, but anyway, I'll show you. You can get a perfectly flat surface, and I'll go over that. Someone did, Matthew, you did at username. I wonder if someone has that username. That's pretty funny. All right, so where am I at? Sculpt mode, Blender 2.8. Anything I need to show? Okay, yeah. First thing I'll go over is that, you know, just like in real life, you have different mediums, right? So you can sculpt stuff out of Super Sculpey, you can sculpt stuff out of Monster Clay, or out of like Styrofoam, ice, you know, like there's different mediums with which you can form shapes. And in the computer, there's sort of two different mediums within Blender, kind of within digital sculpting in general. In Blender, there is multi-resolution and there is dynamic topology. So multi-resolution is the older form of sculpting medium, because one thing about sculpting is you need a lot of geometry. To be able to form these shapes, you need a lot of geometry. So for example, with this, you know, I can sculpt on this object. If I jump into sculpt mode right now, I can move these vertices around, but you can't turn this flat edge into a smooth edge because there's not enough geometry. It is limited to geometry. And so what I need to do is essentially add a, let's see, Control 4 to add a subdivision surface modifier. Alt C is not working anymore. Object, convert to mesh. And now when I go into sculpt mode, I have a lot more geometry and I can start to get different shapes. But you can see it starts to break down, right? Like the polygons are pretty low resolution, and ultimately we have the faceting. Right away, I am going to change the viewport shading. I don't like the default setup right now. I prefer to go to matte caps. Let's try this one here. That one looks pretty good. So now you can definitely see the level of faceting and the limitation of the geometry. Whereas ideally you can like minimize that limitation and so have more geometry accessible. And this is where the multi-resolution modifier comes in. I'm going to add that multi-res modifier, which is the same as a subsurf, except you can dive into certain levels and manipulate at the various levels. And so with the multi-res, we can subdivide a couple times. The higher you go up, well, we can't see anything. We have to do that in object mode. Currently, the multi-res modifier actually does not work in Blender 2.8, so I should show you this in 2.79. DynTopo to the rescue. Yes, DynTopo is a huge upgrade in its own right, but both multi-res and DynTopo are still very usable in certain situations. So let me dive over. We actually need to do this in Blender 2.79. Okay, so here I'm going to add my mirror, my multi-resolution modifier. I'm going to subdivide several times. Let's go to 4. Well, let's go to like 6 actually. And I'm going to go to sculpt mode, which is all of a sudden at the bottom. And in here, so that what's powerful about multi-resolution is that I can sculpt at the high level. If I go to the grab brush, I can sculpt at the high level, and that's all that geometry makes for a smooth sculpting experience, a smooth sculpting shape. But then I can jump down, let's say to level 5 or 4 or even 3, and I can manipulate at this level as well. So this is powerful because sometimes, let's make this a little more relevant. You know, at level 6, you've got a lot more geometry, and let's say that I can add a smiley face right in here. Okay, so we've got a smiley face. We've got a level of detail that's only possible at level 6. But let's say that I want to kind of move this part of the mesh out, right? I want to move it like this. But the smiley face can get distorted because it's manipulatable at this level. But if I go down to level 3, the face is no longer there. I can move this simplified version out. And then when I go up to level 6, that smiley face is better maintained. So that's a very powerful use of multi-res. Also, at least with 2.79 and previous versions of Blender, you can go to higher polygon counts with multi-res than you can with dynamic topology. So whenever I'm trying to sculpt like super high frequency pore detail in a face or wrinkle detail, I do that best in multi-resolution, not in dynamic topology. Dynamic topology starts to bog down and the workflow becomes too slow. So multi-res is still very relevant. I assume it will be the same way with 2.8 once it's all working and up to date. Are we going to get a question? Are we going to get a CG Cookie app? You mean like for your phone? That's interesting. So if you wanted that, does that mean you want to watch CG Cookie videos on your phone? That's my question to you, I guess. Yeah, so Jerry kind of asked the same thing. Is that what you would do? To me, that doesn't strike me as immediately intuitive, because presumably you would want to be able to have Blender open to either follow along or to apply what you're learning. If you were doing it on your phone, like on the subway or something, you wouldn't necessarily be able to do that. But awesome. Yeah, so that, like, whenever you're sculpting a character, Christian, and and sometimes like you do go to the detail stage maybe a little too quick, and then you want to change around the face but maintain your pore detail or your wrinkle detail. Just go down to a level of 2 or significantly lower, make your changes, proportional changes, and then that detail should be maintained pretty well at the top level. Let's see. A CD Cookie app would make it easier to watch the videos on the phone. Yeah, interesting. I'm not sure that we've considered that too heavily, but I mean, if people would want that, we would certainly consider it. Question: are we going to get a CD Cookie app? Any other questions that I've missed? That's what I'm looking for right now. I don't. Okay, cool. Yeah, I don't think I've missed anything. Nice. Okay, so that's a brief rundown of multi-resolution. And the typical workflow with multi-resolution is you start low and, you know, make your base shapes. And then once you've got your base shapes, then you go up a level. You refine those shapes a bit more with a little bit more detail till eventually you get to the final level of detail, which in this silly example is the face, this weird little kind of creature, half starfish, mass of flesh or whatever. Just a simple example. That's a medium, still very relevant, but not as popular as the next medium we're going to talk about. I guess I better leave this open, but I don't want it to take any memory. Go back to Blender 2.8 because Blender 2.8 does feature dynamic topology, and I want to go over it there as long as it doesn't crash or it's not too buggy. Question: would you recommend sculpting in dynamic topology, then retopologize and switch to multi-resolution? That is the workflow I prefer and I recommend. You know, if you look at like ZBrush Central or ZBrush models, like ZBrush is famous for being arguably the best sculpting application, and you see insane levels of detail going on, like millions of polygons, no problem, doesn't break a sweat. Well, if I ever want to do that in Blender, I'm going to sculpt like 50% of that detail with dynamic topology. And then I'm going to retopologize it into a friendly mesh, an optimized mesh. And then I'm going to do multi-res on top of that. It's what I did in the realistic character course. I just jump over there real quick. Nope. In this course right here, it's the approach that I used. It's how I achieved, you know, this much higher resolution. Oh, this is a small image, I think. Anyway, you can't really see it, but like there's a lot of detail in this model, and that's how I achieved it. So once you retopologize, you can add multi-res on top of it, and easily, I mean, depending on your computer, like I've gotten up to, you know, 10, 20 million polygons, and it's still workable at that point. It's getting slow, but it's still workable. So like that's how I would achieve super high detailed sculptures. Question: is it possible? It's possible to revert the model in multi-resolution to make a retopology. Let's see. To revert the model, you can't really like. Let's see. Back in the day, before dynamic topology, I would use multi-resolution to sculpt my model, and then I would retopologize on top of it. But usually, what you start with in a multi-res from scratch, it's not going to be like an animation-friendly model, typically. I hope I answered your question, Daniel. I don't think I missed anything. Zacharias Reinhardt did a sculpt in the early 2.8 with almost no sculpt possibility. Uh-oh. Well, I was playing around with it. I think we should be able to sculpt in here. Let's get to that. Let's actually get to doing something maybe. I'm going to add another default cube. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to add, instead, when I'm going into dynamic topology, another thing to keep in mind is that it's triangulated. So quads are are just not a concern here. We're just going to start with a triangulated icosphere, and I'm going to change the subdivisions up to, let's say 5, okay? So we're going to start with this sphere. I'm going to move it up, just pet peeve, I don't like it intersecting with the ground plane. And I'm going to switch to my tablet at this point, and we're going to go to sculpt mode. Now, a big difference with 2.8 is like what you're used to seeing in the toolbar over here, all of your settings and whatnot, they're going to be found at the top, mostly above the header. So I don't know what this space is called. but I know that this horizontal strip is the header of the viewport. I'm not sure what this is called above it, but this is where you can find brush settings, your overlay, like that's not really important, but if you want to use a texture for sculpting an alpha, your stroke method, all of those settings are up here, and then dynamic topology is sort of awkwardly put all the way over to the right. Okay, so this is where you have your dynamic topology settings, your options, symmetry and lock, which you also have symmetry and lock in the sculpt options. I just realized that was duplicated. Interesting. Interesting. But just note that these settings that are kind of tucked away into the corner are actually super important. I don't know if they're going to change where they are eventually, but it's literally called the top bar. Okay, that's helpful. This thing called the top bar. So yeah, your dynamic topology settings, you'll enable them with this small checkbox right here. Vertex data detected. Interesting. What is my vertex data? A UV map. For some reason, it has a UV map. We don't need that. That's fine. That warning is not a big deal. If we undo, well, I can't undo for some reason. If you just said okay on that warning, that's fine. But we have this dynamic topology enabled, and what's important here, if we turn on our wireframe, so check it out. This is wild. This blew our minds for a long time in the Blender community. I like to think in the CG community abroad too. If I use a brush now, let's go to clay strips, and I start to sculpt. Awesome, the wireframe is not updated. Womp womp. Really? Not at all? Do I have to go out? That's strike one. If I get to 3 strikes, we're going to 2.79. But that's strike one. So the point of that, man, should I just go straight to 2? Am I holding on to this 2.8 thing too much? Should I just let it go? Give me a 1 if you want to see me push in. If you want to see me push forward with 2.8. Give me a 2 if you want to see me go to 2.79. Let me know in the chat. 1 for 2.8, 2 for 2.79. I want to know what the people think as I take a drink. Okay, stick with 2.8. Okay. All right. All right, we got a tie. 2 if it doesn't work. 2, yeah, 2.79. It's kind of split down the middle. Okay, I'll stick with the strikes. If I get to 3 strikes and it's not doing, it's hurting my demonstration. Wow, this is seriously split. Interesting. Maybe 2.79 is better. Yeah, I think that's probably true. That's the feeling that I'm getting. We'll see. We'll see. It's split down the middle right now, but I'll give it the strike thing. If it gets to 3 strikes, I'm going to 2.79. Question: can you demonstrate how to sculpt a primitive shape for demonstration? Yes, that's exactly what I'm going to show you. I'm just trying to go over the settings right now, general concepts to be aware of, and then yeah, but the actual point that the actual shape I'm trying to create is going to be primitives. So back to the original purpose of dynamic topology, the original power that it has is it's, as you should see from the wireframe, when I made that sculpt, when I made that stroke, it updated in real time. Like it auto-generated polygons to match my stroke. That's crazy. It's like unlimited clay. You could just sculpt forever and take this mesh and could perpetually generate new geometry. That's nuts. That means like ultimate freedom for a digital sculptor. And you can control like how much detail. Within the dynamic topology settings, you can change the detail size to like 5, and all of a sudden I have much higher resolution fidelity onto that stroke. Silly enough, I have to jump out of sculpt mode, but now you can see that the geometry is much higher res, meaning if I want more detail, I can actually lower the dynamic topology settings here, the detail size. Within that, you have your refine method, which the default of subdivide collapse kind of always creates new geometry, but where that can go wrong, let's turn off the wireframe. You get the idea of what it's doing, creating new geometry. So if I go to the crease brush, and if I use this, you can see that I'm perpetually creating a deeper and deeper crease, but it's only getting sharp to a point. Oh yeah, Shift D. That's right. This is I forgot about that. There is a hotkey for the detail size, and that is Shift D in the viewport. So if I hit Shift D and then drag my mouse, you can see in this upper corner, keep an eye up here, Shift D, you can see that I can dynamically change what the detail size is. So that is a good good hotkey that Thibaut, I think, shared with us. I can find it a little bit cumbersome if I want to make it a really small detail size, like 5. Hitting Shift D, you know, I guess if I hold Shift, yeah, that's what I should do. If I want to get, it's kind of hard to land on just 5, but if I hold Shift, that makes it more possible. So there, that's how I can land on 5. Nice. Yeah, I'll have to get used to that. I think that's probably faster. All right, so yeah, back to that crease brush. With this refine method, you know, if I use the pinch brush to further illustrate this, I can pinch and pinch and pinch and pinch all I want, but it never gets that sharp. And that's because it's constantly regenerating topology over that area, and it never, you know, pinches. It never like shrinks, and the geometry never gets really tight. So if I want that, I need to change the refine method over to subdivide edges. All right, now with that, if I go to my crease brush, this time I'm going to push out. You can see that that crease maintains a real sharpness, and I can further pinch it. And even though it did create new geometry to compensate for the stroke, it's not creating new topology for polygons that are below this value, this detail size. And by the way, the default detail size is in pixels, so it creates new polygons with 12.8 pixels in size. That's what the default setting is. Rita, welcome. We're about an hour into the stream, so you know, maybe catch up with the. I mean, please stick around, but maybe there's plenty of stuff we talked about in the first hour too. But let's see. Missing any questions? All right. Okay, so yeah, that's kind of how. By the way, these settings are the same from 2.79 and 2.8. The button placement is different. You know, like these settings are up here in 2.8, whereas they're in the left toolbar in 2.79. But conceptually, all these settings are still the same, as far as I know. So you can. I'm not going to go too deep into the settings unless people want me to. But like, play around with these settings, figure out what they do. I mostly, when I'm starting out a sculpture, when I'm being most free and flexible with my sculpture, I use subdivide collapse because, you know, it's always going to generate new topology, and it's not going to create any real bad topology. It's just going to, it's a more flexible format. So with those settings, I don't think I'm missing. I'll just start sculpting my primitive, and we'll go from there. Going to start a new scene and delete the cube. I'm going to add that icosphere again. Yeah, the brush hotkeys have changed, and not only have they changed, or some of them have changed, but they don't seem to work properly. I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to increase the subdivisions a couple times, let's say to 4, and that's going to be good for going into dynamic topology. Probably shouldn't have made a new scene. Tab and edit mode, move that above, just a personal quirk, personal preference. So what I'm going to do here, and for the exercise, the second part of the homework, after you do the Melvin exercise, I mean, you can do them in any order, I guess, but like this part of the homework is I'm going to turn this sphere into a cube with sculpting tools, very simple sculpting tools. So we're going to use the crease brush. Now, interestingly, Shift C was the crease brush hotkey, and it seems to still be the hotkey in 2.8. I hit Shift C, and then it brings up this sculpt tool. It says it's the crease brush, but it's actually the pinch brush. You can see it selected over here, but if I manually choose crease, now it's the crease brush. So the hotkey works, but it doesn't work. And it does the same thing with grab, I'd noticed. Like if I hit G, it automatically goes to the thumb tool, not the grab tool. Kind of quirky. Do you think ZBrush is better than Blender for sculpting? I think by definition, yes. It only focuses on sculpting, and it's only been a sculpting application since its inception. So when a popular app can devote all of its attention to sculpting, it has to be the best one. It's got the most tools, it's got the most functionality. Blender has less functionality, less brushes, for example, but it's entirely competent. I haven't sculpted. I own ZBrush, so it was the first application I bought when I graduated college. I have not used it as a sculpting package in like 8 years. So Blender more than suffices as a sculpting package. I guess I say that if you own ZBrush and you prefer that, like, go for it. But if you feel like, I guess I'm trying to speak to the people who think if ZBrush is the better app, then I'm only going to use ZBrush. It's not worth learning anything less than ZBrush. And that's a silly idea. There are bad sculpting packages, but, I guess there are. There are not that many. But Blender is a very good sculpting package, very capable sculpting package. Hope that makes sense and was helpful. Missing any other questions? No. Good. Are some hotkeys changed from hotkeys in 2.8 changed from 2.7? Yes, definitely. And it's not even in its final version yet for the hotkeys, so don't count on hotkeys necessarily working in 2.8. Give them a shot, but don't be surprised when they don't work. All right, so yeah, I'm trying to turn this thing into a cube, the sphere into a cube. The brushes I'm going to need are the crease brush. Note that by default, your crease brush is set to subtract, so that the default behavior whenever you're just stroking on the surface is going to be crease inward, whereas I mean every other brush, blob brush or the inflate brush, is set to like an outward behavior. So the first thing I do with the crease brush is I set the default behavior to add. Just a small little tip. Enable dynamic topology. Okay, I get that warning again. For some reason, it has UVs. I don't care. We don't need UVs, so I'm going to say OK. Go into dynamic topology, and let's make the detail size 10. That's usually where I like to start with when the relative method is when the detailing method is set to relative detail, the defaults. I change the detail size down to 10, and that's how I usually start off with. So with the crease brush, I'm going to take this round object and start bringing out the hard edges of a cube. So if I start stroking on the surface, it starts to bring out this this hard edge. And like, if you can imagine a cube, I mean, maybe we need to create one for reference. Mesh cube. Let's just put it over here. So we're trying to create this sphere and turn into that cube. There was something I was going to say. Forgot. Oh yeah, so you notice that when you go into something else with 2.8, when you go into sculpt mode, the mesh darkens for some reason, right? So it's full brightness in object mode, and then it goes dark. I don't know what that is, but I don't love it. I don't know if anyone else knows what that is, but anyway, that's a quirky thing. So I've got my crease brush. I'm trying to drag out these corners. So I'm concentrating my stroke into a corner, drawing straight lines and converging them into a corner, and we start to create this square-ish shape. All right, we can continue doing that all the way around, but you might think, well, I'm gonna have to do that for a lot of corners. Why does it need to be that way? It's repetitive. Well, since we're working in the computer, we can actually take advantage of symmetry options. So in the top right, we can turn on symmetry in all axes, in X, Y, or Z, and symmetry meaning mirror. So let's go to, we're going to use these symmetry. We're going to come back to the symmetry options that allow us to dynamically sculpt on multiple sides at one time. But first, since I created an asymmetrical model, I need to resymmetrize it. So in the dynamic topology settings, I'm going to go to this symmetrize button, and I'm going to go from, let's see, it's telling me symmetrize from negative x to positive x. I'm going to click that button, I think. Oh, dynamic topology is turned off. I don't remember doing that. There we go. So you should have seen the mesh update a little bit. It was already actually, it was sculpting by default from in the x direction. So that is already symmetrical. But we can also go in different directions. Let's say from positive, let's go to negative y to positive y, which will take the, where's my annotate? D, it'll take this side and mirror it to this side, right? That's, whoops, positive, oh, wow. That's from negative y to positive y, symmetrized. So you can see it symmetried, you know, in that direction. And then also in the z direction, since we're trying to do a perfect cube, might as well symmetrize from the, let's go positive z to negative z. Whoops. Now, why did it do this? The reason it did this is because my object origin, if we go to object mode, is right here. Okay, so that is not what we want. It's going to symmetrize around that dot. I actually want the symmetry to be in the middle of the object. So hit, go into edit mode. Let's delete this bottom half. All right, delete the bottom half, select all of this. Actually, I don't need to. I can go to object mode and object transform origin to geometry. That puts the orange dot right here in the center. Back to sculpt mode. Now when I use dynamic topology and symmetrize, there we go. Now we have our model completely symmetrical in all directions. Let's see if I'm missing any questions. Can you think of off the top of your head, what is the best sculpt you've ever seen? I can't think off the top of my head what's the best, like narrowing it down to one sculpture. I do keep this Pinterest board. Let's see if I can find that real quick. Of like particularly impressive sculpts. Let me find that real quick. So if you want, to answer that question, you can. These are sculpts that I think are particularly impressive. Sculpture. Some of these are not supposed to be in here. Yeah, I don't know. This might be like quote unquote disappointing. It's just subjective, but like, for example, I found this the other day and thought it was, I don't know, it was super clean. Let me see if I can find a better version. This is kind of a rabbit trail, but yeah, so this model to me, like if you look at the feet, all of the cloth detail is just top notch, like beautiful, painstakingly sculpted. It took a lot of time. And then you've got like the pants, you know, towards the thigh, it gets really simple, which makes sense, you know, but it has this very appealing, it's like simple, but then it's also super detailed. I just think that's an aesthetically pleasing sculpt. I like it, for example. I'll do one more and I won't go through all of these, but there's something about this style of sculpture. The pose to me feels good. Like it's very creaturey. I love the fine details, how there's simplified shapes, you know, in the musculature, but then in between muscles, you have all these intricate dots and like, I don't know, sinewy kind of stuff. Anyway, I don't know. For some reason, this strikes me as being a memorable sculpt. I'm sure that didn't answer your question at all, but like, I do have this board, I guess. If you want me to link you to it, I can. I'll just put that in the chat real quick. You can look through there if you want to see like what I find to be good sculptures. This one does not belong in here. But yeah, like this is really, really simple, but I think it could not be more pleasing to the eye. And therefore like the simplified sculpt took a good artist to create that kind of appeal. Anyway, feel free to check through that if you want. Sorry, I feel like maybe people were not interested in that. Uh-oh, tech issue reply keeps disappearing after you refresh the page. That's weird. Like in the chat here? That's very strange. I haven't seen that error. Question, is there a new hotkey for the set origin option? Yeah, it used to be Alt-Control-Shift-C, but that doesn't work anymore. So if, like, something to keep in mind about Blender 2.8 is from what I can tell, they're trying to limit, to kind of police the overuse of hotkeys. And I think that example of Alt-Control-Shift-C, 4 different buttons into a hotkey, I think is an example of excess. So that I think they're trying to steer away from that and depend more on menu placement, right? So anyway, I'm trying to get on board with that and get used to, like, instead of the hotkey, I'm just going to the object transform origin. Eventually that'll be fast enough. That's how I typically worked in Maya and 3D Studio Max. Like, the other bigger applications tend to be menu heavy rather than hotkey centric. So I think Blender's trying to do that. But to answer your question, that hotkey does not work for centering your origin anymore. All right, so I've got this mesh resymmetrized. And what we can do to make our life a little bit easier in sculpt mode for sculpting this cube, let me go back to my pen, is we can enable symmetry in both X, Y, and Z. So now when I sculpt, I only have to worry about doing one corner of this cube, and the rest of the model will be fine. Will come along with it. All right, so I've used my crease brush. I'm making it really, really big and just trying to further bring out these edges. Though I'm kind of getting a problem right now to where it's this shape right here, whereas I'm looking for this. All right, so this extra space is a problem right now. So I need to figure out how to remedy that. And I think I probably just got a little too sharp in the first place. So I'm going to hold the Shift key to enable the smoothing option. Now that is a hotkey you definitely want to remember, and it's smart that they kept it the same. Shift in sculpt mode will enable the smooth option, and you're constantly going to be smoothing down your mesh. So hold Shift to make that happen. Topo is off again. They must have changed that. I think in 2.79 you could enable dynamic topology, go to object mode, and then back, and it would maintain to be enabled. So that's something else. Not quite strike 2. That's not like a deal breaker, but certainly on the annoying side. But thank you for that, Miranda. I appreciate the watchful eye. All right, so what I'm trying to do is I'm going to go a little bit softer with my creasing. I'm going to not pinch it so tight right away. All right, it's looking pretty decent. Maybe if I jump to my grab brush, which that is, I thought it was the G hotkey, but it's probably best just to pick it right there in the menu, the toolbar. All right, so I'm going to start straightening these edges manually. Okay, so now my edges are starting to square off quite nicely. Once I have those squared off, I can start smoothing in between. Maybe not smooth. How about we go to the flatten brush instead? That's not really working for what I want either. I guess smooth is fine. So I'm smoothing out the bumpiness on these surfaces. All right, so that's looking pretty decent. How about I start pinching now? Use my pinch brush. Oh, maybe this is how it works. Okay, so if I press, you'll notice if you're coming from 2.79, Ken's just going to go down swinging with 2.8. Yeah, I mean, I wanted, yeah, you're right. Maybe I am pushing it too hard. It's just a weird time, right? Like 2.79 is, it's old news, right? Like 2.8 is the next thing. I want to be on board with it. I want to be excited about it, but It's definitely not as stable as I thought it would be. Okay, so in 2.78, I think the way that works is brushes are grouped together like in similarity. So you have grab and you have thumb. Right? Those are separate brushes, and they used to exist separately in the menu, but they're not anymore. I kind of think snake hook should be in there too. But maybe the way that it works is I set which one I want to be the hotkey, right? So if I want crease to be the Shift-C hotkey, I select it there, and nope. I thought that you would select it, and then it would remember. I swear it just did that with the flatten brush. Forget it. Forget what I just said. That's not true. It's just best to pick them from the menu. So what was I going after? The pinch brush, right? I'm going to start pinching these edges to be really tight. But remember that they only get tight to a certain level until we change our refine method to be subdivide edges. Now we can really start to get tight. There we go. That's looking pretty good. Also, hotkeys, very important hotkeys that I've completely glossed over. If you hit F in the viewport in sculpt mode, that's going to be your brush size, your brush radius, okay? So that's how you make a big brush. That's how you make a small one. Shift F is the strength of your brush. So dragging the inner circle out, that decreases the strength. Dragging it in increases the strength. And you can see this black circle in the middle gets more intense, gets more thick the stronger you get. So that's very important hotkeys you want to remember. F for radius, Shift F for strength. And if you know, sometimes being too strong, you just it kind of gets away from you. So I'm going to go back to the crease brush, just try and push out this corner again. It's kind of getting lost a bit. There's room to smooth out the faces in between. And then maybe some manual tweaking. The thumb brush. I never use the thumb brush. Oh, a pro tip about the grab brush. So I always change the stroke, the curve. The default for the grab, I think, is not great. It's this default S curve right here. But I always drag the upper dot in the curve up to the upper left corner, something like that. That's going to just make it a little more intuitive. I got that from ZBrush. Like, that was one of the first things I noticed when I got into Blender sculpting, is that the grab brush felt a little weird. The fall off felt a little weird, and so that was the first thing that I changed. Anyway, I'm getting pretty precise. Like, I'm trying to keep this quite straight. Another pro tip. Speaking of sculpting with mice, we are going to, you don't have to, but when I'm using a lot of the grab brush for pushing and pulling faces around, I will tend to do that with my brush, with my mouse, because it's a little more precise. Whenever I'm using the pen and tablet, taking my pen off of the surface of the tablet, usually, you know, the tip of my pen is kind of moving a little bit as I take it off. And that can mess up like a perfect placement. But with the mouse, it's more perfect. Specifically with the grab brush, that's where I find this to be I said healthy. I started to say healthy for some reason. Helpful. All right, so we're getting pretty close. It's a little bubbly on the sides. But we are quite close. I am smoothing with the grab brush. Smoothing with the mouse. But I'm going to call it quits on that. I think that's pretty close to being a cube. It's a little bit flat. It's not as tall as it needs to be. But hey, we just turned a sphere into a cube. All right, so that's one of the shapes I wanted to show you how to create. And then the next one I'll do pretty quick. Go to object mode, move this one off to the side. Actually, I'm going to duplicate it, because I'm going to turn this one back into a sphere. Crazy. Let's go to question. Tablet toggle in Blender, or do you use mouse? Okay, yeah, no toggling in Blender. I'm just literally taking my pen, putting it in its holder, and then grabbing my mouse. That's what I mean when I'm switching. I'm not toggling any settings. The only setting you might want to toggle sometimes is if we go back to sculpt mode. Is it brush? Yeah, in your brush settings. So we have this, besides strength and radius and auto smooth, but really just strength and radius, is this little button right here that looks like a finger pointing. That is pressure sensitivity. So you can, I'm glad you brought that up, or that was brought up. So if I use that for the radius, let's say, I can set a general radius for my, let's say, crease brush. A general radius with the F key, but then as I click and drag, I'm very light on my pen and tablet, so the radius is actually quite small. If I push really hard, you can see that the radius gets big. Okay, so you can control the radius of the brush. That's maybe not a good example. Let's go to clay strips instead. Let's go to enable dynamic topology and detail size to 5. So if I hold lightly, you can see that I get small strips. But if I push down hard, I get big strips. Okay, pretty powerful ability. And you can do the same thing with strength, right? You can turn on strength, and so being very light, I turned it off for radius, so we're always getting the same size of brush, but it's very light affecting. And then when I start pushing hard, it starts to affect very hard. So that's a powerful use of pressure sensitivity. If you switch from mouse to, I know that if pressure sensitivity is on for the, if it's on and then you switch to the mouse, let's see if I can reproduce it. Sometimes you just get a weird error. I think for the, is it the grab brush? No. I don't know. Sometimes that can cause problems when you leave pressure sensitivity enabled, but you're not using a pressure sensitive device. Okay, I think I'm missing some questions in here. Depending on your computer specs, can you have 1,000,000 polygons? Which specs in my computer do I have to update so my sculpts can have more polygons? That's a good question. I don't really know. I don't know if it's GPU or CPU or memory. I mean, my computer is from 2013. It's a Mac Pro, so it's a good computer, but it's an old computer and it's still running this stuff fine. You should be able to get to 1,000,000 polygons relatively easy, like regardless of software, regardless of hardware. Like unless you're using like a 10-year-old computer or worse. But most computers should be able to handle 1,000,000 polygons for sculpting. That shouldn't be hard. Question, what is fall off? So when I say fall off, what I mean is, it's a great question. If I go to my curve, let's talk about that again. So let's use that. Yeah, we can still use this. So I'm using, this curve is a fall off curve. Imagine that the brush, this is only half of the brush radius if you look at the curve, right? So up here at the top is the most influence of the brush. And as the curve goes down, it decreases to having no influence. And that's why when we pull, we get a soft fall off. We get a soft manipulation, right? You can see that it's a curved shape like that. So that is what I mean by fall off. And you can change that stuff in the curve options. Let me go back. So we have this sharp fall off. If we look at the curve again, it starts very strong and then quickly dips down. And that gives us a shape like this. We can change to like a rounder curve. So you get more of a bulbous kind of effect. So that's what I mean by the fall off curve. It's a very powerful ability within sculpt brushes. It's what makes it like intuitive and feel flexible. Which one is it? So yeah, which particular, I don't know if you're asking me. Yeah, you're getting RAM or I guess kind of like, maybe it's not a specific thing. It's kind of just an updated computer, like a modern computer will be able to handle RAM, higher resolution sculpts. Okay, former graphics coder here. CPU and GPU will have both in effect. Okay, great. That's really good to know. I personally have never bought a computer designed to be great with sculpting. I don't know, it just has worked. If I have a decent computer, I'm going to be able to sculpt decently. If I have a great computer, I'll be able to sculpt great, if that makes sense. But yeah, I'm glad Kenneth chimed in there and that he's a former graphics coder. That is helpful. Did I miss any other questions? Okay, no. Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to get back to these primitive shapes, and I'm going to turn this cube into a sphere with my brush, with my pen. So I'm in sculpt mode. Well, can't we just start smoothing down, holding shift and start smoothing this thing out? No, that's not actually going to work. That's a good idea, and it makes sense, but we have too much geometry at this point, and the sculpt brush, or the smooth brush by itself, does not actually update the geometry. So here's a couple options. What I do want to do conceptually is I want to decrease the polygon count. Man, it's really annoying that the wireframe does not update in dynamic topology. So there's too much geometry right now. I want to get rid of, I want to decrease it, because if it's less geometry, I can make broader manipulations faster. So what I will do is, how we can do this in dynamic topology is set the detail size from 5, let's make it higher. I'm going to go back down to 10. I say down, but I mean back up to 10. And I'm going to grab an inflate brush. That's just my personal preference. I'm going to hit Shift F to make it a very, very low strength, okay? Very, very low. And whenever I click, oh, I need to change dynamic topology method to be subdivide collapse. Whenever I click, you'll see the geometry immediately goes down. The resolution, it becomes simpler. So as I touch this a few more times, I have essentially kept the same basic shape, but have reduced the amount of geometry. That's just kind of a quick way to do that. And now when I start to smooth at a high strength, wait, that's not working. The reason I thought I could do that was I need to enable, let's see, brush unified strength. That way all of my brushes maintain the same strength. So if I make it weak on the inflate brush, or if I make it strong on the inflate brush, then hold shift, it will also be strong there. Okay, so now it's smoothing much more rapidly. And we are starting to get into a sphere shape. Wow, look at all this extra geometry. That's interesting. I haven't seen dynamic topology do that in a while. And then I tab into edit mode and it's gone. Quirky. Okay, I say we've reached strike 2 at this point. Definitely a collaborative strike 2 with all the quirks going on. We get to strike 3, we're going to 2.79. All right, so I've got this essential like sphere shape, but it's very bumpy. So like the kind of the exercise here is like looking at the shape and trying to figure out how to smooth it. For one, I need more geometry. So let's go back into dynamic topology into a detail size of 5. That's going to give me more geometry. Kind of the inverse of what I just did a few minutes ago. I'm going to increase. I've got my inflate brush at a very low strength, and I am lightly touching the surface to increase the geometry. Now it doesn't look like it's happened, but if I hold shift and start smoothing out, look how much smoother it is. Much, much higher resolution. So now we can see all the bumps, and I can start pushing it into more of a spherical shape. But yeah, this is an interesting exercise of like, you ever heard of like people who can draw a perfect circle by hand? Like it seems like that's probably close to impossible. Well, similarly, this is our equivalent to that. Like who can make a perfect sphere by hand? And that, it's not perfect, but anyway, have fun with that. See if you can get a perfect sphere. I think we're pretty close. Pitcher is seating, he's going to a strike. Wait for the first crash. Oh no. Seriously? Let me save my file. Primitive sculpts. Waiting for the first crash. Come on, guys, I need some support. I need the spirit bomb to keep Blender from crashing. That's what I need from you guys. Question, if I understand if not due to this being a sculpting week, but would it be acceptable to mesh model small things? Just that I have an idea for a scene with a few small, yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, there is, like, sculpting is not good for a lot of, well, it's not good for like hard surface necessarily. It's not ideal for it. So I'm trying to think. I mean, this Wacom tablet, for example, like that would be a terrible thing to sculpt, right? It's a thin rectangular object. You can knock that out in like a minute or two with mesh modeling, but in sculpting, it's going to be really hard to get any surface flat. All that to say, yeah, if you have this project in mind for this week, like make most of it about sculpting, but if you want to add some like additional details that's easier to mesh model, totally go and do that. Yeah, but try and like spend most of your time sculpting is kind of the goal of the week. It's exciting to wait for the third strike. Thank you, Miranda. I appreciate that. Awesome. Okay, so we've got this pseudo perfect sphere. I mean, I think I'm pretty happy with it. I know that if I started like measuring it and stuff, it would not be correct. But it's in the ballpark, I feel like. I keep making it smaller and smaller. Got that big fall off. I don't know, I feel like I just kind of made it worse. Let me undo. I think that's pretty good. We're going to leave it. Move that off to the side. And then, let's see. The other object, I think, is a cone. I can't remember what I started out with the cone. We'll just make it simple. We'll do it out of the sphere. It's a similar shape, but go back into sculpt mode, and this time I'm going to use a crease brush, similarly to the way we did on the cube over here. I'm going to create a hard edge using that crease brush on the very bottom. Okay, so I've got my crease. Whoops. This time we do not need Z symmetry. Turn on dynamic topology. Symmetry, let's turn off Z. I want it on the X and Y axis, but not on Z. All right, so we got our invisible hands helping us create the bottom. And since it's a sphere, it should be relatively easy to match that shape somewhat. Smooth out the bottom because that needs to be flat. All right. I'm having the thumb brush. Good grief. Does anyone use the thumb brush in here? Has anyone ever used it that has used Blender for sculpting before? What in the world? I just changed that to, I hit Shift-C there. I swear I just hit a hotkey that went to the crease brush, but I can't repeat that. All right, so I'm pinching the bottom level now. But the bottom face is still too far down. It's a little bit better. All right, pinch one more time, make it really tight. And then at the top, let's also pinch, or crease brush actually. Now I'm going to go to the 7 orthographic view, top orthographic with my 7 key on the number pad. And I'm using the crease brush to create a point at the top, and that actually worked really fast and well. Now for this bulb, we're going to flatten that out with, never use the thumb brush. Yeah, me neither. Not in the thumb brush. To me, it just seems like a very low strength grab brush, which I don't know why people would use, but it's in there. Glad I'm not the only one. Let's go to my smooth brush and go to flatten. I like to use this brush to just, well, it's very intuitive. It flattens surfaces out. Too much. I like Hershey Kisses, but I don't really want this to look like one. Yikes. going between smooth and flatten, I think, is going to help. That's pretty close to a cone. Good enough for demonstration, I'd say. Maybe give it a little bit more of a creased edge. Go light with it. There we go. I think that's a cone. I think it's a cone. I think we're good enough. All right, so that's kind of the first exercise I'd like to see you try. Using sculpt tools, create primitives from other primitives. Turn a sphere into a cube into a sphere, and then a sphere into a cone. That's going to be a fun exercise, I think, to kind of get you warmed up with sculpting. Maybe start with that one and then go to the Melvin exercise. Oh, they do look like, yeah, those are Hershey Kisses. Question, which build are you using? So I downloaded this build like an hour before the stream started. And let me see which build. It's the one from today. So it's 2.8 Alpha 2. Let's see if we can find that. Blender builds. So yeah, it's 2.8 B4D, this one. It's the one from August 21st for the Mac. Awesome. All right, so that's not the right Blender. We didn't quite get to strike 3. I'm sorry to disappoint anyone who was hoping we would get there. So we have about maybe 30 minutes left. That's probably enough. Do you want to see me do the head, like try and block out a head and generally sculpt a head from like a sphere or something? If you'd like to see me do that, I certainly will. How do you get your browser to give you the good afternoons? What is that? It's this right here. What is this called? What is this called? It has a name. It's something on Chrome. It's like a little plugin for Chrome. Momentum. It's called Momentum right here. So look, it's called Momentum Chrome extension, but it just turns your like new tab screen into a pretty picture, and the time, and then you can make little notes. It says hello. So that's a little add-on for Chrome. Yes, why not? Okay, so sure, sculpt a face. We'll do it. Sweet. Any other questions that I missed? I don't think so. All right, we'll spend the last half hour sculpting a head. I imagine, how many people in here, give me a 1 if you have seen me sculpt a head before. I feel like I've done it a million times. Number 2 if you've never seen it. I'm just curious. Okay, sure, Dragon Ice. While people are giving me the numbers, how to render an image and save it so I don't need to make a screenshot. Sure, so if you want to render this, let's... All right, so we got Eevee. Technically here's a render of Eevee. Let me add a camera, because you need to have a camera to render. I'm going to go into my... Oh, there was a camera in here already. Camera lock. All right, so we've got a render here set up. What is my render resolution? Let's go to 50 and then render image. Oh, I haven't seen this. By default, it popped it out into another window. That's new. I've been using 2.8 for rendering and it has not done that. Different stuff. Always takes getting used to. So you have this render, and then apparently it can be found in this other window. Also, it more traditionally is found in the UV image editor. And you can change to the render result. All right, so within that, and the window that was torn out into its own window is just the UV image editor. You can go to the image option, save as image, or just save as. And then you have options in the bottom left for PNG or JPEG, your typical image settings, and you can pick where to save it. So that's how you save an actual render instead of having to take a screenshot. All right. All right, so we had a 2, 3, I don't remember. Fair enough. Maybe it's been a while. Okay, so yeah, we have seen people. All right, cool. Well, as long as, 30 to 50% have not seen it before, we'll do it. We'll sculpt a head. Cool. I'm going to start with, this is an object. I don't always like to start from a ball of digital clay, but this is an example where I do like to start that way. So I'm going to create an object, mesh object, icosphere. I say icosphere literally as I pick UV sphere. All right, give it, well, we'll tone it down a little bit. Let's say 4 subdivisions. Oh yeah, I'm sculpting with Eevee. That's kind of fun. I'm going to turn that off though. That makes me nervous. All right, so dive into sculpt mode. All right, so the basic shapes of a head, right? When I say a head, we kind of have to lop it off somewhere. We have to cut it off of its body, and I tend to do that. I don't like lopping it off right here at the neck. I think it does end up looking like a decapitated head that way, but I like to cut it off like shoulder, right around here. Then it's more a bust rather than a decapitated head. Oh no, Shift F is not working for me in Blender 2.8, but the option is on View Navigation. Dragon Ice, you're not a dummy. I don't want to hear that talk. No, there's so many things about Blender that are simple once you know them. Using a weak old one, yeah, it's probably because of that. So, all right, so we decided we're going to lop off the head right around here. That means we got to pull out a neck and then pull out shoulders. All right, so I'm going to use the snake hook brush with dynamic topology enabled. Grab that snake hook. What snake hook does is it's like the grab brush, but it kind of leaves a trail of geometry behind. I'll show you what I mean. We click and drag. If I had it at full strength, you can see that it's constantly creating new geometry, leaving it behind in its wake. That is what the snake hook brush is. Like if I wanted to create a little human, we got some arms, we got some legs, we got a head. Ta-da! Ooh, we actually have a character with 4 arms. So that's the power of the snake hook brush. Now I'm going to use that more controlled and less silly to pull out a neck. Okay, so I'm going to start from actually the bottom. Imagine that the face is looking this way, right? So we're going to have a nose, some lips, a jawline, a head. All right, so that's kind of the direction that we're going to be sculpting this head. And so the back of the neck does not actually, or the neck does not just come out of the bottom like this, okay? It actually comes out and angles backwards. So I need to turn off my symmetry settings. Just leave X mirror on. So I'm going to pull this neck out and at an angle downward, okay? That's actually more accurate to how a neck comes out of our heads. A neck comes out of our heads and into our torso. So we've got a piece of neck geometry started, and then from the front, we'll just pull that out to create shoulders. Okay? We've got general shapes, but they're not nearly as dense. You know, the shoulders need to be beefed up a little bit. The neck needs to be shrunk down, but that's how we're going to start. And I'm going to use the crease brush this time, sort of like the bottom of the cone that you've already seen. Look, I just hit Shift-C, and now it's on the crease brush. How did that happen? I don't get it. If I hit Shift-C again, it goes to the pinch modifier, but if I hit Shift-C a third time, it doesn't go back to crease. What is happening? All right, at the bottom, I'm going to use the crease brush essentially to give me a sharp edge. Oh, I want to enable, okay, unified strength is on. Why is that so slow? So I'm looking at the back, and I need to do the same thing to the front. Whoops. let's also not get carried away. Currently, I'm using a 5 pixel detail size, and that's going to be too much geometry too quickly. So it's going to get lumpy. It's just going to be bad. So we want to use 10 to start out with. All right. Now we're starting to get more of a shoulder structure. All right, so it looks like we have this ball head on top of shoulders, so that's a good start. And it's less creepy thinking that it's just a cut off head. I want my pinch brush now. The pinch brush and crease brush, I think, is just messing with me. Just being difficult for the sake of it. All right, so that's a simplified shoulder structure. Flat at the bottom. Pretty typical of like a bust setup. Now I want to pull the neck in a little closer. That's why something felt so weird about this, and it's because the curve, it reset for my, and it's the thumb brush, for Pete's sakes. Yeah, that's the problem. It's the thumb brush, man. These hotkeys, they're making me struggle. The thumb brush is why it slows. Kenneth, you were on that before me. Question, is the creating a real-time head in Blender still available somewhere? It is. It's on YouTube. It's on YouTube. That is the first tutorial I ever created, and I'm not super proud of it. It's not taught very well. Like, as soon as you start watching it, I've got this like real downtrodden tone to my voice, but it is on there. Just look up YouTube Blender realistic head. I'll bet that will return it. Yeah, so here it is right here. Ugh, it was rough times. But all right. So yeah, we've got the shoulder structure. We're not using the thumb brush anymore, and we're starting to reproportion our neck to be better shaped. All right, at this point, I can start to thin the head. So our head needs to be, it's taller than it is wider generally. So I'm going to shrink it this way. All right, the back of the neck, I want to smooth that out. You can see that what that did. And then for the front, I want to flatten it out as well. Pull it down for like a jaw. Ah, the thumb. Look at it sneaking in there, giving me trouble. All right, so flatten the face a bit. All right, it's already starting to look like a mannequin head, you know, that you might see clothes on at the mall. Strike 3. Is it strike 3? Oh, notice, as you've said before, sorry, maybe I missed this tip. All the group brushes on the same hotkeys, but looks like selection is not looped. Okay. Okay, right. Nothing like a little decapitation. Silly people. It's not quite strike 3. Not quite strike 3. Trust me on this. We're going to go to the clay strips brush. So now we've got this sort of outlined a little bit. I like to build the jaw shape with the clay strips a little, typically. Clay strips, and then we're just going to draw like an L shape, or like an angled bracket, or a tilted L. Okay, so that's going to draw out the jaw shape. Looks kind of like a beard, but I'm going to smooth this side of the beard. Just that side, leaving the hard edge of our jawline. And then I will further reinforce those shapes with the crease brush, holding control because I switched it to add, remember that. Holding control. All right, so now we've got a super tight jawline. Too tight, frankly. But sometimes it's, thumb brush. So if like I said, it's too tight. Sometimes to get your shapes, it's best to exaggerate them and dial them back. Sometimes it's people, especially beginners, don't like to commit to the shape and dial it back. They just never commit, and it's a very blah-looking head or sculpture in general. So don't be afraid to commit fully, even too much, and then dial it back. You can always smooth a shape out. But it looks much worse when you don't go all the way, when you don't commit completely. Awesome. So we've got this jawline, but the chin is way too big. Simple enough. Just, I'm not going to even acknowledge the thumb brush anymore. When I catch myself, I'm just going to, kind of like a streaker at an event, like just don't draw attention to it, and it will lose credit, or it will lose notoriety. All right, so I'm pinching not pinching, I'm just pulling the chin a little tighter so it comes down more to a point. All right, we've got a jawline structure pretty nice and developed. How about an ear shape? For this, I'm going to use a mask brush first. I'm going to use my mask. I'm just going to draw like a blob where the ear should be. Okay, mask that area, Control I to invert it, and we'll use First, I'm going to take the clay strips, and I'm going to just repeatedly draw a structure, like make the same stroke in the same spot over and over. I'm going to build out this little, well, it's starting to look like an ear once you do it enough. And then use the snake hook to bring it out a little bit further. That's actually not a bad shape. From the side, I need to kind of hook it around towards the back. That's not bad. It's a little big. I need the crease brush to like tighten up the shape. All right, that's looking pretty good. Now, if you want, like for example, this ear to me is just a little bit too big. What you can do is use the pinch brush as a scaling mechanism. So if I'm going to turn off dynamic topology because I don't want any geometry to be generated for this. I'm going to use my pinch brush and actually a mouse just so I can click really quickly. I'm going to make my brush pretty big and click. So like that pinch essentially served to scale the ear down. And if I hold Control, it will actually push it out and make it bigger. So that's kind of a fun little neat feature of the pinch brush. All right, so I want to make it a little bit smaller. Go back to my grab brush. Yeah, it is definitely thick. It's a thick ear right now. By the way, I don't know where the THICC came from. Is that like a PG rated explanation? If so, I would be curious, because that's pretty popular now to say thick like THICC. You might be able to hear me. I'm like sculpting with the mouse right now. Sometimes I do it out of laziness, just because I don't like picking up my pen all the time. Excellent. I love seeing comments like that. Like, I've never thought of using the pinch brush like that. That's great. That I consider the stream a success, as long as little nuggets are being taken away. That's great. All right, I think the face is just sticking out a little too far. Everything else is starting to shape up pretty nice, but the face is like way out there. That's better. All right, so we've addressed everything except maybe the hard part, frankly. Turn on dynamic topology again. Why in the world are there UVs on this icosphere, on the default icosphere? Borderline PG rated. Okay, I'll have to check the thick stuff out. That's funny. If you guys like the scale tip, there's also a rudimentary rotate option in sculpt mode using the, what's it called? Yeah, okay, it's under nudge for some reason, which I've never used, but the rotate brush is kind of like a spin, you know, like if you take whipped cream and like spin your finger around whipped cream, that's kind of what the brush does. So similarly, you can just click, wait a minute, how do you do this? That doesn't work the way I remembered. Oh, okay, that's what it's doing. So yeah, you literally click and then rotate. That's not what I remember. Man, the behavior changed. I used to be able to like just click. Anyway, I use this one a lot less, and I'm just kind of clicking and dragging down. Anyway, maybe take that back. Play with that if you want, but I don't use the rotate too much, but I have rotated stuff slightly and quickly in the past, but that is not working the way I remember. All right, forget that. All right, what was I doing? Now we get to the trickier parts, which is the muzzle, the mouth, the nose, and the ocular cavity for the eyes. See if I can do this in the next 7 minutes. Yeah, the rotate brush has been there for a long time. I've only used it a handful of times. It's time to get into the field. All right, all right. Well, you've seen enough of 2.8, so let's get 2.79 off the bench. I'm gonna save this as, what did I do with my other objects? I'm gonna save this as basic head, and we'll get our beloved 2.79. Oh, am I gonna be able to do that? Yeah, I've saved the file. Let's see if I can open it with 2.79. I'll bet I can't. Basic head. Nope, I can't. So let me, it got all weird. Let's see. Reload startup file. Instead, okay, so here's a little tip, I guess. We should be able to append the geometry from a 2.8 file to 2.79. I believe that that's still, like, completely fine. We can't open up 2.8 files in Blender 2.79, but we should be able to append the geometry. Basic head, object, icosphere, append. Yeah, so that works simple enough. Now I'm back in 2.79 with my sculpture. So interestingly, my viewport is noticeably slower in 2.9 with this mesh. Like, it's just a little bit jerkier. I don't know why that is. Yeah, okay, so you can append, copy and paste the mesh even. Can you do that? I'm curious. I've got the mesh selected, Control C. It says copy selected objects to the buffer. Control V, bang. Yeah, that is cool. You can copy and paste. That's neat. Awesome, so we're in 2.79. And I can't see my outline. That's weird. We're going to go into sculpt mode, and we're going to sculpt the ocular cavity. We're going to give 2.79 a chance to show its worth, which is a silly idea. I mean, 2.79 is by far the more stable version, though it is running surprisingly slow with this stream going. 2.78 did better. Bizarre. Wonder if I need to quit 2.8? Not really. Strange. All right, so we're going to use all the same tools. I'm going to take my clay strips brush. And first I'm going to drag, like, just stroke along the middle of the face. Maybe we should update our dynamic topology detail size to 5. I'm going to stroke in the same position in the middle of the face to start to create a nose shape. Let's increase that strength a little bit. Maybe also I'm going to leave the strength at 0.8, not affected by pressure sensitivity, but the radius I will affect with pressure sensitivity. That way I can make the middle of the nose, if I press lightly, push out a little bit more than the outside. You see that? Pressure sensitivity is pretty useful. And then on the side, I'm just going to create a little bit of a nostril piece. Just get that basic shape started. That's what's important here. And then he'll hold control to start scraping out for the ocular region. All right, that's usually how I like to start, is by scraping out geometry first. Because, you know, your skull, if you think of a skull by itself, like there's two huge holes where your eyes are. So, you know, to get the shape started correctly, it's best to remove geometry and then add it back later. So that's typically how I start the face. And then you can start smoothing out around there, and that will create a pretty decent ocular hole. Same thing with the nose, just start smoothing it out a little bit. But with the nose, it's not out far enough, so we need to just grab it from the side, pull it out, smooth down the profile. Making our way. One thing about that I like to do pretty early on is the temple area, like this general area right here. I like to smooth it down and even inflate, like deflate it a little bit. Let me show you what I mean. I can probably just do it with a smooth brush at this resolution. Yeah, just holding smooth. Like that's a pretty important feature of the face that is often overlooked. But yeah, smoothing that down definitely helps. Maybe take our clay strips brush at this point. Build up the brow slightly. Yeah, it is strange how it's so slow. I've also noticed with 2.79, and now I'm like confirming in my own head that it is 2.79, that when I've tried to record tutorials with 2.79, OBS struggles a little bit, and I'm streaming with OBS right now, so I think it has something to do with 2.79 and streaming, or and OBS is my feeling. After today, I'm pretty certain that has something to do with that. All right, so we kind of built up our brow structure a bit more. The nose is a touch like big, though that does give it a certain personality. I'm just like sculpting sort of like an everyman, a normal average man, so to speak. Man or face, sorry. I do default to male faces, and I don't really know why, but I do tend to do that. All right, so that's kind of, I'll just take you this far. It's 4 o'clock, right? Well, where I am at, it's 4 o'clock, so we've been on for 2 hours. I'm just going to show you quickly about the mouth, the muzzle, how I start that, and then I'll leave you with that to kind of go on your own. I won't finish off the head, but with my crease brush, again, changing that to add, just like in 2.8, I'm going to draw an M shape, the letter M, so like this. I'll just draw it real quick. The M shape, holding control. M shape like this. Like an M shape with a very small peak. All right, like that. Going to start the mouth very simply like that, and then I'm going to inflate. I think I'm going to inflate right here in the crease. Now that I've made it really deep, I'm going to go to my inflate brush, which is the I hotkey in 2.79. And let's see, what was I going to do? I'm going to change the subdivide collapse to subdivide edges. And now when I inflate right here in the lips, it's going to all of a sudden tighten up that shape. Let me try that again. Okay, so it's bringing the surfaces together, it's inflating them toward one another, and we're ending up with this somewhat lip shape. From there, I can use the crease brush to kind of emphasize the outer lip edge. Okay, so that sort of mirrors the M shape up at the top, but then at the bottom, it often just becomes round. Something like this. It's actually flat from this angle. But pretty quickly we start to get some lips, and it's not, the proportions aren't right, they're pretty wide, so maybe with my pinch brush and my grab brush I'll just move it all kind of closer to the center. I don't want it to look like this person is puckering. Look from the bottom. It comes to this weird peak. Maybe lightly touching it with the smooth brush will help all around. So we've got some decent lips. Though one of the things that's very often overlooked for beginners is the corner of the mouth. Very, very important to push that pretty strong in the corner, like push it way back. Okay, so I'm just holding the crease brush, pushing it pretty far back. Okay, then grab the clay strips brush and drag this column right here. And this is going to create this shape. I don't know if it has I'm sure it has an anatomical name, but I don't pay much attention to that stuff. But I'm going to build up that shape first and then smooth it out. Maybe smooth it out a lot. But that's going to, we're pretty close actually to looking how I want it. Use the inflate brush maybe to pinch around that area a bit more. The actual pinch brush to tighten that. And we're sort of there. Much closer than we were a few minutes ago. I'm going to grab my inflate brush. Now my cheek kind of looks like he has golf balls in it, in the cheek. So I'm going to smooth that. Let's see, subdivide, collapse. I want to maybe a level of like 7 or 8. I think this geometry is a little too high res. So I want to decrease it for the sake of shaping, but I don't want to lose all of that detail. I think that's pretty close. All right, so we're in the ballpark of a human head. We've gotten off to a decent start. I'm gonna just finish the shape of this jaw. It's a little bit willy-nilly. My curve is not good. That chin is pretty massive. Maybe I need to go ahead and add the crease. That is common with chins. Whoops. That is because of subdivide collapse. Let's change it to subdivide edges. And quickly, that mouse did not feel good in that sculpt stroke. All right, we're going to wrap it up here. That's going to be it. You know, a decent start to a head. Hopefully you picked up some tips about how you can get started. But definitely, I mean, try and take it further than this as far as you can in the week. And yeah, so that's a start. We got 2.79 in the game. She's definitely not obsolete by any stretch. So you can pick whichever you want. If you want to go 2.78 or 2.8 or 2.79, that is up to you. 2.8 or 2.79. Awesome. Dimples. So if anyone has any last minute questions, let me know. Yeah. Oh, thanks, Pavel, for the about girl sculpting. What are you linking to? Oh yeah, awesome. Thank you for that. There is a lady face lesson in the Art of Sculpting course, so thank you for that. I don't think I see any questions, so we might be able to wrap it up. You can do this. Awesome, guys. Well, I think that's going to be it. I kept you a solid 2 hours, 7 minutes, but thank you for being here. Stimulating conversation as always. I really tend to look forward to that pre-stream chat. If anyone doesn't know, the chat is open an hour before the stream starts. So if you want to just shoot the breeze with us, I'm in there pretty consistently during that hour. But otherwise, I think I will let you guys go. If I don't see any more questions, great. Okay, cool. Awesome. Well, thanks. Oh, question, homework. do you question what is the homework? I can go over that real quick if that's... Let's see, no masks. I did not use the mask other than for the ear, like the mask brush, if that's what you're asking. But if you want to put a mask on your person, on your sculpture, that's fine if you want to do that. Oh yeah, so yeah, that's right. Maybe I'm not as explicit as that as I should have been. Yeah, so 3 primitive shapes. Kind of what I did in the stream is like, if for explicit instructions, take a sphere and make it a cube, then take that cube, turn it back into a sphere, and then take that sphere and turn it into a cone. Those 3 objects, first part of the homework. I'll go back and make that explicit in the class syllabus right after this. So. Yeah, sorry for being a little bit vague with the homework, but awesome. Awesome. I'm glad you guys enjoyed the stream. Thanks for being here. I will let you go and see you in the class threads. I will definitely grade any other homework that's been turned in from week 2 if you got turned in late, and see you at the stream next week. Goodbye, everybody.